session for the day. Good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, members of the media, representatives of civil society organizations, and academics. On behalf of the Asian Network for Free Elections, I would like to warmly and sincerely thank all of you for joining us today for ANFREL's post-election discussion with electoral stakeholders and the launch of our final international election observation mission report for the Thai elections. My name is Ayan Rahman Khan. I'm the program officer for ANFREL's uh, governance and electoral reforms pillar, as well as the mission coordinator for ANFREL's international election observation mission to the 2026 Thai General Elections and Referendum. Your presence here reflects a shared commitment to democratic governance, electoral integrity, and constructive dialogue on the future of elections in Thailand. We are especially grateful to our partners, stakeholders, and members of the media who have helped and engaged with us throughout the journey. Over the course of the elections and the referendum process, our mission observed key aspects of the electoral environment, engaged with a wide range of stakeholders, and agenda for this morning. We will begin with welcome remarks from the head of mission, Ms. Elbrel Dava. Following that, Ms. Briza Rosales, the executive director of ANFREL and mission director of the Thai International Election Observation Mission, will provide an overview of ANFREL's election observation mission. We will then hear a presentation of the mission's key findings and recommendations from our electoral analyst, Mr. Amayal. Following the presentation, we will open the floor for a short question and answer session with members of the media, where we highly encourage constructive questions. Um, after a brief after a coffee break, we will reconvene for a roundtable discussion, and following that, that will conclude the end of today's discussion and report launch. We hope today's discussion will not only reflect on the recent electoral processes, but also help identify constructive opportunities for collaboration and reform in the years ahead. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite the head of mission of ANFREL's International Election Observation to Thailand, Ms. Elbrel Dava, to deliver her welcome remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of ANFREL and the International Election Observation Mission to Thailand, I am pleased to welcome you to today's launch of ANFREL's final report on the 2026 general election and the referendum, and the post-elections discussion with election stakeholders. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are honored to have you with us, representatives from civil society organizations, domestic election observation group, academias, and the media and other stakeholders who have contributed and followed the Thailand election process. Today's event marks the conclusion of ANFREL's International Election Observation Mission. Over the course of the mission, our team observed different aspects of the electoral process and engaged with a broad range of stakeholders. The report being launched today represents ANFREL's final assessment of the election referendum process based on those observations and engagements. There is a saying in Mongolia, from where I'm from, that the observation of elections starts from the day after elections. Thus, reflection and dialogues are also a very important part of this democratic process. The discussion that followed today's report launch provides an opportunity for stakeholders from different backgrounds and perspectives to exchange views on the electoral process and reflect on lessons learned in recent election and referendum. As we begin today's agenda, I encourage all participants to engage in a constructive and considerate exchange. The diversity of experience and expertise represented in this room is one of our great strengths. And I hope our discussion will contribute to a deeper understanding of the opportunities and challenges facing electoral processes in Thailand. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all those who have engaged with supporting the mission throughout its work. And thank you to the colleagues of ANFREL and the International Election Observation Mission for their professionalism and dedication. Thank you once again for being all here today, and wish you a productive and a meaningful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Albraldova. Now we will be hearing from Ms. Brisa Rosales, the Mission Director for the Thai International Election Observation Mission and the Executive Director for ANFREL, regarding a brief overview of ANFREL's International Election Observation Mission for the 2026 Thai elections and referendum.
Thank you, Yan. Good morning, everyone. Happy to see familiar faces. Yes, and thank you for coming for this post-election discussion and final report launch of the mission report of what ANFREL did. So just let me give you an overview of what ANFREL did, how many observers were deployed, how many areas, and what were the areas of focus. So, okay, so this is the ANFREL mission. So everything started, and we are banking, or the assessment is deliberately grounded in the comparative analysis of what we did during the ANFREL mission during the Thailand 2023 general election. So basically, it serves us as the report is served as a critical component and a benchmark for assessing both the continuity and change across key dimensions of the electoral processes. Basically, it is our way of saying what has had changed after the 2023 general election. So we are coming from that standpoint. And with regard to our mission, of course, ANFREL deployed 24 international election observers, including the two electoral analysts, and one of the analysts is here as with us today. And we have deployed 24 international elections observers covering 31 provinces across Thailand to observe the campaign period, at voting and election day. Election day are technically the election and constitutional referendum. So just to provide, or just to show you that this is at least an acknowledgement of the accreditation at the Election Commission of Thailand for ANFREL to do an international election observation mission. What were the areas of focus? Of course, coming from the 2023 standpoint, we also covered the electoral processes surrounding advanced voting and election day and referendum. We also did couple of different key informant interviews and group discussions with regard to assessing the quality of voter education, access to information, incidence of invalid ballots, because this is not a new issue, and respect of voters' will, accessibility of polling stations where the election and referendum were conducted, the tabulation as to the transparency and accessibility uh, of it coming from different stakeholders, the tabulation and announcement of results, resolution of election disputes and complaints, and of course, the one of the important standards when it comes to inclusiveness or inclusivity. So we take a look at the participation of the women, the youth, the persons with disability, the LGBTQIA plus, and in the election campaign. So basically, these are the areas of focus where ANFREL observers interviewed different electoral stakeholders, and at the same time, um, actually a week after the election, we also released our interim report, and then we have conducted a diplomatic briefing to talk with the stakeholders. And today is the opportunity to interact with everyone. especially with important stakeholders coming from the CSOs and the media, for us to talk about the areas of focus and findings coming from our annual observation mission. So let's get the ball rolling. So I'll pass on the microphone to our electoral analyst, Ama Elver, to present the findings and some of the recommendations that we put in the report which you are holding right.
You, Brisa. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Um, Without further ado, I will delve into the key findings of the mission. Obviously, this is a very shortened version of what you can find in the report, which is available in hard copy with you and also should be available on the website for anybody following online. You can get it straight from the source, so I invite you to do so. First, regarding the positive aspects of the election, the voter turnout was fairly high at 71%, and this being the first elections since the expiration of the Senate's transitional powers to select a prime minister. It's quite complicated, I'm sure you know. Until 2 years ago, the Senate had the power to jointly select with the House of Representatives prime minister, and this is no longer the case. So this has resulted in the strongest electoral mandate for any Thai government since the 2014 military coup. There were also concerns of um, the constitutional referendum and the election being on the same day, which could lead to overcrowding and malfunctionments on election day. Thankfully, we did not observe that. We thought the concurrent holding of elections and referendum was mostly successful. Thailand also continues to demonstrate by regional standards, I insist on that, a strong baseline in election management. This means that ANFREL observers thought that the voter lists were credible, polling staff were mostly competent, the polling arrangements and the openness of polling stations were found to be transparent, and election day was peaceful and transparent. So the baseline, really, the basics of election management, Thailand has historically been strong, and that has proven to be true again this year, with the caveats that are coming, of course. The first caveat is that the shortcomings that ANFREL and other stakeholders identified in the last general election in 2023 more or less have remained unaddressed. Um, the Election Commission of Thailand did not implement any recommendations from election observers, from what we can tell, and neither were any meaningful reforms undertaken in the past 3 years. These include challenges in registering for advance voting, procedural failures in making sure that those advance votes end up at the correct constituency, insufficient voter education, uneven accessibility of polling stations for voters with disabilities. Um, that is 76% of the polling stations ANFREL visited were found to be accessible for voters in wheelchairs, for instance, so that still leaves room for improvement. And we also have ongoing issues with the design of ballot papers as well as the assessment of invalid ballots. And once again, there were discrepancies identified in the announcements of results, which again carry those same issues from 2023 and to some extent from 2019 into this year's election. For the people who might not be familiar, especially those who might be following online, this is what we mean with regard to the design of ballot papers. These were the ballot papers for the constituency parliamentary elections, which against international standards do not contain any essential information with regard to to candidates, political parties. This is really not the best practice that we would recommend. So that's an illustration, but I'm sure the Thai people here with us today are familiar with these. And with regard to the assessment of valid ballots, here are some examples that are also in the reports. Both of these ballots were invalid, despite clear stated voter intent. And this is in line with Election Commission of Thailand's regulation. So this is exactly what we speak of. We always favor intent of the voter over procedural formalities. Um, Furthermore, there are systemic issues that undermine the environment in which Thai elections take place. These include rampant vote buying, which by all accounts was the highest ever in this year's election, ongoing restrictions restrictions on freedom of speech, including Section 112 in Les Majestés and other restrictive legal clauses that have been used to suppress freedom of speech, legal harassment of candidates from reformist political parties, as well as structural barriers to equal representation of marginalized groups, including women, youth, LGBTQI, and others. The result of this stagnation that we have observed is that overwhelmingly, the members of the Thai public, civil society, and political parties interviewed by ANFREL observers have consistently expressed frustration and distrust towards Thailand's election authorities. So this is with regard to consistency between last election and this year's election. Furthermore, after election day, this very fragile situation was aggravated by major post-election controversies. There were very publicized cases in Chonburi, Patutani, in Hassanakam, and elsewhere, which prompted widespread calls for transparency and accountability. This, of course, undermined trust in the electoral process. And we also regret that, in turn, the response of the Election Commission to those demands was often inadequate and ill-conceived. It was not the appropriate answer to legitimate demands for openness. And even in some cases, the ECT went to disproportionate lengths as officials from the ECT have filed criminal charges against at least 10 people in different cases. Perhaps most illustrative of these concerns was the controversy over the use of unique barcodes and QR codes on ballot papers in an unprecedented move by the Election Commission. There are now many legal cases pending before the Constitutional Court and other Thai agencies. We don't want to prejudge of what could happen in those legal avenues, but ANFREL's position, which we reiterate, is that we have serious concern over such use of barcodes, which may have effectively deprived Thai voters of their right to a secret ballot. We also call on the Election Commission to immediately drop the charges that were filed against 6 citizens who questioned the use of barcodes. This includes a spokesperson for the People's Party and a journalist. And we also call on Thai authorities to uphold Thailand's commitments to the right to independent scrutiny of the electoral process. And here we have a direct commitment because Thailand is a signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and as such is bound by the United Nations Human Rights Committee's interpretation of Article 25, which guarantees the right to independent scrutiny. So overall, the key finding of our report is that the major challenge that has emerged is not so much administration of the election itself, but the ability of the Election Commission and other institutions to maintain public trust when confronted with controversy, scrutiny, and demand for accountability. Transparency, responsiveness, inclusion, civic participation, and meaningful accountability are equally important to an inclusive and credible election process, as is procedural soundness itself. So there are discrepancies between what people expect from the Election Commission and the answer that they have received in turn. In this regard, public confidence in this year's electoral process may already be irremediably damaged. As I'm sure you know, there has been growing calls for accountability, growing discontent. Despite, again, on a procedural level, the 2026 elections are not substantially worse than 2023, but the response in the communication storms that have evolved really into a growing discontent. So that is our key finding here, is a breach of trust, and that reflects the title of our report, which is Questions of Trust, Demands for Accountability. We do, however, want to emphasize that there are steps that Thai authorities can take to improve integrity and rebuild trust in electoral processes going forward. But these are more long-term structural reforms. I will not go over those recommendations. I'll probably not have time to mention all of them individually. But again, they are all available at the end of the report that you have in front of you. First, regarding the legal framework, we call on Thai authorities and legislators to repeal Section 112 on lèse-majesté and to start lawsuits against peaceful protesters, activists, politicians, and journalists prosecuted for the legitimate exercise of freedom of speech. We also call for the enactment of a comprehensive framework against strategic lawsuits against public participation, or SLAPS, which would help to guarantee the exercise of freedom of expression, assembly, association, and political participation. We also call on Thai authorities to consider adopting policies to support political participation of women, youth, and other marginalized communities. Um, we also call on legislators to revise election laws and allow for independent candidates to participate in line with international standards again, to remove undue restrictions on suffrage for members of the Buddhist clergy and detainees, and allow for voting in places of deprivation of liberty, as most countries in the region already do. Um, Thai legislators can consider revising election laws that constituency candidates and party lists have a unique candidate number. This is quite a widespread demand among both voters and candidates. That is not a responsibility of the Election Commission, but of Thai legislators. So that would be something for them to consider as the new parliament has taken its place. Um, and finally, on the legal framework, to amend election laws to recognize the contribution of election observers and to enshrine the right to independent scrutiny at all stages of the electoral process, including the tabulation of results. To remind everybody here, tabulation of results is not accessible at the moment, neither to observers, nor to media or political parties. Um, and finally, legal framework on referendums to ensure sufficient time for voter registration, which was an issue this year, as well as voter education, public debates, and stakeholder engagements. Moving on to electoral administration, so these are recommendations really for the team. The election calendar should be published in the most comprehensive form possible, including timeline for announcement of results, dispute resolution, and the accreditation of observers. Uh, Guidelines should also be public on the accreditation of observers, both Thai and international, which is not the case at the moment. We call on the ECT to revise the design of ballot papers that they're using in line with international standards, as illustrated before. That includes prioritizing voters' intents and voters' information over minor procedural details. We also call on the Election Commission to make essential election data open and available to all online, um, in bulk and in analyzable, non-proprietary formats. Basically, we're calling for open data at all stages of the electoral process, which would go a long way in restoring trust in the announcement of results, for instance. We also would like to see a public docket of election-related complaints, because at this stage it's very difficult to keep track of different election complaints. At what stage they are, what's the resolution. It's very complicated for us as observers to get this information, and we think the Election Commission should be proactive in this aspect. Essential voter information should also be systematically displayed at polling stations. That includes invalid and valid ballot marking. That also includes the constituency codes for advanced voting, which was an issue this year, as the codes were not made public until ILO released them halfway through advanced voting day. So that's something we would really like to see considered essential and displayed in all cases. The Election Commission should also provide regular public briefings and detailed explanations on the electoral process, and be more proactive in its communication rather than reactive when controversies emerge. That includes complaints, requests for recounts, any administrative decisions, including eligibility of candidates and validity of ballots. The ECT can also develop clear protocols governing the storage, transport, and security of election materials, since there were some controversies emerging around that, for instance, in Hungary. Very quickly on voter education, the ECT should strengthen voter and civic education through a unified information platform. At the moment, the ECT uses 3 different apps. There's a different website for the results than the official city website. All of those information might be available, but they're not available in a single platform. And sometimes voters might be confused or might encounter difficulties in accessing data that actually exists. Education materials should also be accurate, timely, politically neutral, and available sufficiently in advance of voting day. Furthermore, public education efforts beyond the basic procedural voting instruction can be provided to ensure voters have information on democratic participation, on their rights, on the referendum processes, and the role of institutions that they are electing. On inclusion, we call on DCT to establish a dedicated inclusion and electoral participation unit that can focus on promoting political participation of persons with disabilities, women, youth, elderly voters, LGBTQI communities, I think minorities and other groups that are marginalized currently. Voter education materials should always be accessible in multiple formats, including formats that are friendly persons with hearing disabilities or visual disabilities, uh, includes audio formats, simplified materials, um, basically including inclusive voter education materials will go a long way in reinforcing trust in the process again. Political parties can also do their part by recruiting, supporting, nominating candidates from historically underrepresented groups, especially women, persons with disabilities, and LGBTQI communities, and again, the physical accessibility of police stations can be improved, as previously mentioned. And the very final slide here, and that includes civil society organization, and for things that civil society and citizen-led accountability initiatives can go a long way in providing oversight between election terms. That is, parliamentary monitoring, public oversight of elected representatives. There's lots of details here, which I invite you to look at. Scrutiny does not end on election day. Uh, that's the point that we'd like to carry across. And finally, election authorities, including the Election Commission, the Parliament, and others, should enshrine election observation and citizen monitoring initiatives as essential components of democratic accountability, rather than on an ad hoc basis and reply to requests uh, sometimes depending on the mood of the day, it feels like. Thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to our discussion later on. And I'll hand the mic back to Ian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Briza and Amael for giving us a snapshot of ANFREL's mission and areas of focus, as well as a deep dive into ANFREL's key findings and recommendations with regards to the legal framework, electoral administration, voter education, inclusion and accessibility, and parliamentary and civic oversight. This concludes the presentation of our findings, and now we would like to open the floor to questions from the media. We will have our colleagues on either side of the room with the microphone for anyone who would like, for any members of the media who would like to ask questions to our team with regards to our findings for the 2026 Thai election and referendum. You may also feel free to ask the questions in Thai because we do have translators present and we do have translation devices as well. So please feel free to ask questions in either Thai or English, whichever you're comfortable with. Sort of feels like everyone agrees with their findings, findings and recommendations.
โทษทีนะครับคือถามได้นะครับ อยากให้กำลังใจก็ช่วยกันถามนะครับทั้งสื่อด้วยนะครับเข้าใจว่ามันเป็นเรื่องใหญ่เรื่องเยอะเนาะคิดว่าพวกเราน่าจะมีคำถามกันนะครับโดยเฉพาะสื่อครับเชิญครับ
Okay, so my observation is that you mentioned that there are a lot of issues that have not been addressed for this election, but you said that it has been remained unaddressed since 2019 and 2023. So which one do you think is most alarming to you?
Number one would be the accessibility of the tabulation and announcement of results. It should be publicly available. So when you start counting, the good practice is that we see the counting, that everyone can see the results at the polling station level. But when you elevate, it should also be available to the public. That should be the number one, to increase the transparency.
Hi, I have two questions. I think your headline of the report, you said like, it's procedures, it's a trust more than procedures. And maybe I want to see a difference between, what happened in 2023 compared to what's happened now. You said like there's a big lack of trust when it comes to the voters and stuff. Do you see any patterns, any changes compared to what's before? And the second is when it comes to pre-vote, is there any sign, because we talk about a bit more on procedures, like corruptions, was that like before, and did you observe anything before elections and to see where the money goes? Yeah.
Happy to answer the first question. With regard to the pattern that we have observed, this come. I mean, I'm coming from your statement with regard to the decline of trust. So the pattern that we have observed is with regard to not so timely um, communication and responsiveness coming from the election commission, because it would make a huge difference if there is a timely and responsive communication coming from the election commission, so that election stakeholders will also be more responsive and vigilant when it comes to reporting these concerns that we have faced during the 2023 and 2026 election.
And I'll just add to that very briefly that again, the patterns were mostly the same. The single biggest difference in election administration was the use of barcodes. Well, there were barcodes in 2023. They were not unique, and because communication was not proactive, that's something that only came out after election day, because the template ballot papers released by the election commission did not have those barcodes. So we did not question it. Nobody questioned it until February 12th. And on February 12th, everybody collectively said, hold on, there is an issue here. And the election commission then went to crisis management mode, which is never a good thing for an election management body. They should be proactive. If they introduce changes, they should be clear about why those changes introduced and what would the effect be. So that's, I think, an issue. With regard to pre-election, there are many issues that we have identified. I think most of them are not news to you in the room. Primarily with regard to restrictions on freedom of speech. That is something that is ongoing, whether or not there are elections in Thailand. The exercise of fundamental freedoms is curtailed, and that undermines the environment in which elections take place, quite simply. Vote buying is something that we have observed before election day, but as everybody knows, vote buying is extremely difficult to prove. And even more, it's difficult to prove who benefits and how it affects the vote. Because we believe Thai voters are smart and in many cases can take the money without letting that affect their personal decisions. Um, what we can say is that everybody we talked to was concerned about vote buying probably being the highest ever in this year's election. We do not have substantive proof of that, because how do you prove something that is illegal and going on behind closed door is higher than the last election? We simply can't. So this is an issue of perception in a large aspect. There is no doubt that a lot of money circulates, but to whom the crime benefits, I think we cannot be conclusive on that. We would just like to again see better enforcement, better communication, and better practice from the election authorities and law enforcement authorities on that. I think that's the main point I'd like to say. Thank you.
I think it's interesting when you talk about the vote buying. So my question is that whether is it beyond the scope of work of UNFREL to do in terms of more? I understand that UNFREL is like monitor the elections, but on the result, you saying that actually the election in Thailand is peaceful, like there's no real concern. I mean, concern compared to the other countries. But in terms of like, as we know and we agree, the vote buying is like really and how to investigate. I wonder whether it's in the mandate of UNFREL to like to do like research, investigative research, or get deep down into the situation of vote buying where it's happened before, right? I'm not sure. Is that all? Another question also is that because you also mentioned about the peacefulness in the election in Thailand compared to other countries. So what should be the other big concerns, or would that be lesson as of like good practice, something that to learn from here and to play to the other countries also, or any lesson learned from the other countries that can use for the future elections. And my last question is about the election integrity, as you know that one of the key concerns, right? The transparency and how the committee coming into place yeah, how do we advocate to the community to be more transparent, to be more accountable? Um, yes, I it's, for me, I think that is a issues like very interesting for the election situation in Thailand.
Answer the first one. That's a good question, actually. To answer it directly, yeah, it is part of the mandate and purview of ANFREL that we study the patterns of vote buying and how it is being conducted in different jurisdictions in different countries because every country is unique. And we have gathered the pre-election assessment up to election day. We have seen the patterns also on how it is happening on the ground, but of course the difficulties is how it can particularly attribute to a particular candidate or political party. So that's something that we can take on moving forward, especially on hopefully we can empower election authorities because it's not only um, when you talk about vote buying, it's not only an election problem; it's also an economic problem. It goes beyond elections when you talk about vote buying. So something that can empower election authorities on how you can um, improve the accountability mechanisms on how people can effectively report when something is happening. And number two, with regard to lessons learned on how what is something that can be carried forward in the next elections, I would say and emphasize it's the communication coming from election authorities. That's one of the best practices that we are seeing in different countries. When an election commission or when an election authority is sitting down with the election stakeholders, voters, civil society organizations, providing timely briefing, regular briefing with domestic and international organizations, everything can be addressed. So that's one of the best practices that you can see across Asia. You need to have an empowered election authority.
I will also highlight a couple of other best practices from Thailand. I think the openness of polling stations themselves on election day. That's quite good. That's something historically that Thailand does a good job at because polling stations being outside, people are free to go and to see the voting stage, which is not the case in many countries. So we actually quite appreciate that. The tabulation of the process, that's a part that we don't have access to. And again, we call for everybody to have access, but voting operations are very clear, very transparent. The layout of the stations usually is fine. There's no overcrowding. Between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., concerns are very minor. Usually, everything goes. The issues are mostly 5 p.m. and later. Uh, that's something that we have highlighted as well as Thai civil society have. So there are good things in the process. The voter lists, although we were not able to conduct an audit of the voter lists, we believe voter lists are high quality in Thailand. That's not always the case. Many neighboring countries have issues with duplicate names, with people missing from voter lists. For instance, we did not encounter any voters that were missing from voter lists. It does not mean they do not exist, but they're probably not that common in Thailand compared to neighboring countries. So we want to give credits in some areas. Also want to give credit to the ECT on the ECT report websites, which can be improved because that stopped at 95% of preliminary results. We would like to see that up to 100%, of course. But to their credit, that is something that they've implemented in 2023 after issues in 2019 where ANFREL and other people were critical of the results. So they have learned from that. The website is very usable. It's easy to access. We would like to see that go to 100%. I would like to see that down to the polling station level. So it can be improved, but most countries in the region do not have a platform such as ECT reports. So again, there are good takeaways from Thailand. The baseline is strong. It's always more difficult to go from that baseline to a perfect election. That's where the most of the work is needed, really. So thank you for the question. Would you have any?
Yeah, I just wanted to also kind of on top of what our colleagues mentioned. For me personally, especially with the best practices of Thailand, what actually to me is a very good practice, and I've seen this through many elections, is the voter turnout. Because voter turnout to be over 70s for countries such as Mongolia is exceptional. And it seems to continue on, especially with the younger generations, where they're very much active in politics and actually have a very responsible attitude towards participating in elections. Whereas in countries such as Mongolia, we only have about 25 to 30% of our young people participating in election. And election turnout itself is a major issue. It's becoming a big issue in countries such as ours. So I believe, especially the mobilization of voters and young people and their attitude towards elections are very much something that could be practiced across Asia. So.
And maybe just also quickly, I also want to give credit to the people in this room, to civil society. Thai civil society is a lessons learned, really, because you have ramped up initiatives for accountability. Election observers have been more numerous with every election. There are some very highly professional groups that have contributed to those demands for recounts, demands for transparency on the results. So really also hands off to Thai civil society. There is a demand for accountability in large part thanks to you. So I want to highlight that.
Promise this is the last good practice. Advance voting. You need to attribute the high voter turnout also because of the advance voting. You would not see that in different countries in Asia. And it's also available to all voters. Normally, you would see it only a day before, in different country, hours before election day. You would provide reasonable accommodation for a particular sector. But here, it's available to all. And it's happening 1 week before the actual election. It's really a good practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions and answers. Yes, we would move. So with that being said, we would like to conclude the question and answer session with the media. And we could perhaps go on a short 10 minutes coffee break. But before that, I would like to hand the mic over to Rana, our Senior Program Officer for International Election Observation Missions, for a final announcement. Don't worry, the 10 minutes for the coffee break starts the moment you get up from your seat. Not now.
Hi everyone, this is Manjesh from ANFREL. You can call me Rana. So just a little announcement that immediately after coffee break, we are going to resume again. And I would request our friends and colleagues representing CSOs or the domestic observer groups and academics to gather back in this room so that we can also have a closed door post-election discussion. So that will, I think, not 10 minutes, Ayan. I think we have time until 10, yeah, 15 minutes. So we can start at 10. We can start at 10:40. Just like going as per the agenda strictly. So yeah, thank you so much. See you.